Hello, Judge Napolitano and the Judging Freedom, the YouTube channel. They have guests that are intelligent, like some of the best read men in the world and women in the world. And but they have recorded demonstrable criminally foreign influence, fact, trivial nature, quality aspects of nature inherited through the campuses, A through Z, sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly, replacing and having replaced what our founders communicated about principal things like about why and how, not to refer to our founders plural as if we know the name of any of them besides James Madison. That's key because other was is pretended, and that was is being used to sense for the breaching method that it taught, self-added collusions and cover-ups, where and how it taught American history and replaced what our founders communicated. It replaced our founders unknown and why and how we're supposed to know they're unknown, and they had to counter extort other people. We don't know who was just counter extorted, or if it was everyone that was counter extorted. It couldn't have been just James Madison. There were plural founders that were in on his plan. And even if we don't know for certain that one of them was Native American, the plan would not have worked unless every Native American had already been against how there were the abridgments. There were the constitutional abridgments before there was a constitution. And that's discernible because the Constitution's about unabridged fact should be nature, unabridged Constitution, and that hyper-additional to it is the value of our nature, is the value hyper-additionally is ground and its location /s. Still the unchallenged and better than perfectly exploited tool of the breaching method replaced right from the communications of James Madison. In the video, I put a link to it, a John Mearsheimer, who's one of the intelligence sources of Judge Napolitano. The intelligence community, they use words like empire to show self-valued roles, self-valued collusion as the breaching method needs, and sensing for it. Like empire. We had to become out of nowhere a country. The only reason it worked was because of James Madison's plan. Where that is the only correct answer will cause the Declaration of Independence. James Madison's plan. See, President Trump, he's /chief note. He's also one of the best read men in the world. What everyone misses with the economics is also with everyone forced to miss it. And if they don't, they are sensed. Originally and still there are subject treatments like slavery. James Madison detailed about why nobody wanted rules with slavery. Nature itself shows us this. Now, but if anyone was going to do anything about it, if anyone was going to do about it simultaneously against every woman, simultaneously against every native, simultaneously against every difference, even our black people's whites of eyes and what nature communicates with it. When nature is not only itself as criminal insidiousness nature, which it also communicates to us, shows us. Natural law is real. There is an identity of value progression that is not our species body, nor is it the other species bodies. But it is showing us that it is generating both. So it is us anyway. We are an individual species body of individual bodies, with all group differences demonstrated by it, generated like male, female, two eyes, two parts of time. Past, we know is true always, and the present. And also the present and the future, we know is true always. Even never get to the value of the seasons. grouped individually value, and simultaneously they are valued of 3 parts of time. With the difference between male and female is also the difference of it as value, as an equal value, to show us every individual identity, every grouped identity, or group part of an identity, and every simultaneous identity has a semi-nature relationship to the identity that is generating all things. And so boxing, but the sciences share an identity. And so boxing but makes no sound, but prefers the shush sound. And while simultaneously martial arts semi-prefer the shush sound. And while wrestling does not prefer the shush sound. And they are about fighting, but by the rules. But the rules have been abridged since semi-ancient times, specifically to measure and maintain nature's demonstration / us of it, apart with only permitted propagated, only permitted self-cultivated roles with a breaching method, hyper-foreign breaching method propagated. That which had slavery entrenched northern colonies and southern colonies before America's founders were born, and through their lifetime prevented them free speech. James Madsion detailed this to be communicated for him and for ourselves and for the rest of humanity. But instead, we have the collusions with the framing of issues and subject treatments with exception nature as collusion / S as an array, sensing also still for the breaching method anybody individually, even if as a majority or altogether, not collusions, and that's adapted to. Polling campuses and like Quinnipiac University has collusion / S with Connecticut courts, family members, and retired Wethersfield police chiefs with a Fred Grisey, and with others involved with sexual and medical offenders of kids, interagencies, and with retired Wethersfield police chiefs, and with CBS News, distinctly with Fox News and their sources, including the interbranch forging and switching names and sequences, time collusion / S, criminally foreign influence uses of their databases with names on all sides of criminal and civil cases at the same time. Their sources, their family members, neighbors, all natures of conjunctions to people and things that the breaching method used to hide behind and through. All that is recorded. Conscious uses of the differences of guilt of names with the exceptions to the network's locations. Even the differences of guilt of intelligence at the network locations or where they go, or the intelligence associated with the locations next to or conjunctive to it. There are a whole bunch of identities of difference, and our founders left us to finish the job of showing collusion / S that it is necessary to show, because that's right where and how the breaching method is discernible. It forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded modern countries A through Z to blame other things, others, or ourselves for things that it caused and keeps. The human fact, tribute nature breaching method replaced right from the founders' communications in our faces, self-value, collusion / S, where that body was sensed relative to use / S of all locations / S, then hyper additionally at database location / S discernible, and hyper additionally with ones with campuses and relative to homeschooling exceptions, etc. They have replaced why and how our founders directed us to educate ourselves. Replacing what our founders directed. Principle, first thing to understand, why and how our founders had to counter extort everyone else. We don't know which ones are founders. We don't know if any of them, besides James Madsion, who was our founder, the president/chiefs. We're directed to understand clearer than day why and how. Well, the whole time he was a president/chief, he did not have free speech, James Madsion. Then you guys are going to explain the Monroe Doctrine. Native Americans were already fighting with Native Americans because the ground was already tactically denatured, nature's system. It was already demonstrating with negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and anyone not collusion/esprit with use/s of those demonstrations by nature itself of the collusions with the breaching method and with with those demonstrations. Anyone not collusions keeping those demonstrations blamed on other things, others, ourselves, therefore increasingly incapable of speaking about the breaching method and of defending roles with blame wrong and guilt or who to blame or what people are saying when they're speaking about predicate acts relative to the breaching method. Because a whole bunch of people are guilty at the same time, and I did both sides of issues, and with the exceptions, like with the parties in the independent party, collusion/s replacing our founders' words, pretending it's debatable, dishonestly, or would have surfaced anyway, pretending the outcomes in cases mean what they don't, collusion/s with the news, hiding the actual outcomes of cases as collusions with all natures of organized crimes, next to all natures of crime scenes, even preemptively, actively in grouped ways, and increasingly only capable of being. Even with the news, interbranch intelligence, same time, overt criminal enterprise, private ones, even when they're not in those cases, the same exact way /s. Our founders directed originally and still overt criminal enterprises, private ones, their sense and sensibilities juxtaposed opposed in there too. Mass behavior racketeering worse than war crimes. This is where our founders left to speak. Whisper Creek, the entrance to every science, they show like these things, like this very simple. James Madsion probably don't know the names of our founders, plural. We have black pupils, whites of eyes. A breaching method was involved. Instead, they keep our founders framed. That depends on other offensively pretended with passions and emotions. To be, Thomas Jefferson wasn't our founder. What are you talking about? See, these are fights that a breaching method set up to have our own self-value collusion/s, pretending things are debatable that are not, while simultaneously pretending things are not debatable that are true always. They can't discern because they have things that are pretended true always that are not. The F.B.I. has collusions simultaneously. Speaking about, blaming things on colonialism the way they shouldn't, because worse than that was involved too. And preventing other people from blaming colonialism, which they should, even though they're doing it wrong. That would have surfaced. We would have surfaced how it's even worse. The same way that they still have our own sciences expert, American history experts have self-value collusion/s framing our founders and calling them the framers. Think about how sick what was behind that which had even slavery rules only permitted northern colonies and southern colonies, more than 13, and then America's founders were born. Think about how nature needs us to have short words relative to how it's using the human species body. A unity. While simultaneously forced its demonstration of its value needs by independence. And the difference. Everything is showing us that there's every identity of volume has a distinct identity of relationship to itself / non-distinct, even one made up has the hypervolume, has the volume science / hypervolume science inseparable from it. This which enables hyperprogramming to work. You guys forced me to say things now so I could prove things later, because my identity is being stolen by the networks, their sources, and interbranch at the same time. The databases have been used for an organized crime method /S at all locations /S, every single place the human species body is. In many ways, thank God I am not a lawyer. But we can get people, we could show men like Judge Napolitano the error of their ways, replacing about why and how James Madsion detailed why, how, if anyone spoke up about slavery or things about women outside of internationally monitored conversations, outside of, and things in ways too, overt criminal enterprises, private ones with sensibilities, collusions with the difference of guilt with that too. Because the breaching method is all about needing other things, others, ourselves, blamed for what the nature shows us, all those different affronts on humanity's differences /S. They were all equally about value as a human fact should be nature breaching method. They were about the human fact should be nature breaching method. Right where that value is true always by nature itself and by our founders, that is replaced. It's gotten away with only because of people pretending other that were our founders than they were. We're directed to understand how they had to counter-extort the people that were at the Declaration of Independence. And the breaching method would not allow them free speech. They had to fake free speech to the way we know it. Everyone loves the words of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitutional Convention, but you leave out, you describe it the way the breaching method forced you to. And thank God the founders knew that you guys would do that. And so they directed us not to refer to one person as our founder besides James Madsion. These are people that have been stealing from us. I mean, involved with the torture, extortion, slavery of humanity, and keeping it blamed on other things, others, ourselves. Every country has rules with this, because every country was child abused through how, where, and how the republic for which we stand and its ancient campus Marseilles has only been a known tool of abridged voices, collusion /S with a hyper-abridgment that is also collusion /S manifest with the fact, attribute, nature, quality aspects in nature of people A through Z, and or them sensing for the breaching method. If you guys wouldn't sense for the breaching method and lie and change things, when people use black pupils, whites of eyes alone, and the other things that we could use to discern the experts wrong, and collusions too. And then they hid that and got away with it by the way the breaching method showed them. Nature's identity, its identity relationship to itself, the only increasing value of that has the identities as at the prisons, standing natures of criminal insidiousness, nature used remotely, shown they need to hide collusion /S there or at the crime scenes associated with their federal criminals and killers and child abusers, leaders of kids they had collusions with before they were in there, and to force a principal child abuser. All kinds of natures of organized crimes there at the prisons, and further with the state corrections offices of Connecticut and with the state the state judicial branch officers, and the differences of guilt there next to it or conjunctive to it are manifest relative also to conscious uses, collusion /s, with uses of phrases like manifest destiny, where they change and fake what people say when they speak about predicate acts with facts, and where and how words are manifest and defined properly, yet manifest, or appreciated properly. They have rules with like ad hoc or labeling arguments of people to make things like even with the Holocaust. The Holocaust is used to sense for the hyper-foreign, where and how Germany and Jewish people had collusions with psychiatry, for example, only concentrated per worse. And they still do, while tactically delusions wrought too. That has a big role. They have all kinds of putting fake things in databases, interagencies, also where they speak on blame and guilt relative to where and how forgiveness /non-forgiveness. They're simultaneously used together and apart, tactical ulterior from how nature shows us to, when nature is not only itself as criminal insidiousness, which is one of the way nature shows us. It is functional, it's complete identity, being hyper invisible but still discernible, distinctly from how its complete identity is also the invisible but still discernible. And the value of a slash between that as the value of the standing nature, nature's identity that we could discern to an extent. Its complete identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that are inseparable from every finite part, every grouped active part, and every simultaneous part of anything, including art and demonstration /s, of how the simultaneous /hyper simultaneous and the hyper simultaneous, the simultaneous /hyper simultaneous, left to right and right to left, are simultaneous. And how the sciences share an identity that English was revealed to teach about and through, and where they appear not to come with demonstration /s of the, it comes with demonstration /s of the same. It only feels like game /s, or else we sense. Vaccines. I teach us things, but long. So in other words, so they speak about hegemony. Nature itself shows us that we are supposed to be simultaneously bound. And President Obama, President /Chief Obama, he noted to us, Russians and other countries were here together with us before our founders were born. See, people aren't allowed to speak about this. That's one of the things that aren't even, it's not even a secret, but countries A through Z, they hurt each other if they give this up because they get hurt otherwise. It's one of the ways, it's a part of the way /s that the breaching method keeps other things, others, or selves, blame for itself, and self-value collusions keeping it, and nature's demonstrations of it, forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to be blamed on other things, others, or selves. There was never a need to pretend that any identity of science had integrity. Where many ways, we all know, we all agree, we have never seen, here Anthony, we have never seen integrity formally speak the way we know our found when we pay attention. Not honesty spoke for the suburbs, let alone the cities, let alone the means we have to build. Does everyone thinks with the money and the economics, you have to have and security. You guys think about security. You guys can't think about security. The suburbs were designed to unfold the way they did by a torture, extortion, slavery method. You guys are still collusion / replacing what our founders communicated about self-added collusions without having been to at the founding locations A through Z. It's discernible. I haven't even been to them all. They're not teaching about James Madison's plan. You guys won't even allow other people to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, or would have brought up the plan to counter-extort everyone. That's why George Washington came. And, to rearrange how they looked at their own extortion, torture, in fact, human nature slavery, therefore physically. I don't care if you're getting paid a lot of money. If you have to be part of roles with slavery, you're physically, mentally, and spiritually, enslaved, and nature will be demonstrating it to you. You guys hear theater. That is hyper-evidential inter-sciences collusion /S regarding what they call science. Oh, well, I work with the scientific expert. The experts on American history have obligations they forsake. They have forsaken. The names in the law have relied upon that. James, the people they defend our founders' names as the way they're as collusions to the people attacking them, and they're framing them for slavery and calling them the framers. We're supposed to blame the breaching method, and it was still entrenched. And we are not even allowed to even be a country one moment. We still didn't get to be a country yet. We're still abridgments. It's not because they don't have jobs. The people of New York City in those big buildings packed next to each other, and that one's next to it in New York City and behind rappers and rap videos. It's not because they didn't have a job why they don't have means. It's because not one science name of any campus was allowed to be honest and proper with reason and morality, syntax. Or that body was as sensed and it was as adapted to, including if that body is a majority of people, including if it is any modern country's name, for the method /S. Back forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded already. Only remembered other things, others ourselves, forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded to be blamed. Where these collusions stand so vast, but timed, coordinated collusion /S. Is discernible right where and how, with the proper, true, always answers are replaced. Not one has traced, but with delusions handed down to the experts on psychiatry too. Criminally pointable, tactically delusions raw, all kinds of natures of organized crimes in databases no one's allowed to look in, and they know this. And they already exploited that with a whole bunch of different countries at the same time. We have means out of nowhere, people. So we have to have people that are, all natures of all statute, all readings of them and appreciations of all natures of statutes and precedents. At least they were breached all at once at A through Z. Here, Anthony. No Trey. How are you? So, in other words, Judge Napolitano has a Judging Freedom YouTube channel, and he's covering the topics in the world. By the way, in Palestine right now, people are going to get malnourished, People are getting locked in further and further, where both sides of issues are used to hide behind and through by a hyper-foreign human fact-checking nature breaching method and rolls with it that never went away from since before religious messengers were born. Proofs of it is that even if that was made up, there are criminally foreign influence uses of databases self-valued through the ages and relative to where the names of the people of the sciences speak and spoke. By the way, my name is not Romulus. My name is Anthony Wall. I use the name Romulus because the Republic stands abridged. In many ways, it is more probable, even if it's not. In other words, I don't think even that Romulus or Remus, our cipher, is more probable and practical than what is theorized regarding this. And that pantheism is about this one singular, hyper-singular identity of value progression that is generating individual species bodies of individual bodies and all group differences. And or it shows us when it is not that same body generating all the finite differences grouped and simultaneous, relative to positive and negative simultaneously. See, computers work this way because they are forced to by nature. They're also pretending with the experts that things are debatable that are not, while simultaneously pretending things are not debatable that are. Just like why and how the FBI and other agencies have worse than criminal incompetence with words like colonialism or colonization. Just like they have the Civil War. They have collusions describing the Civil War the way the breaching method showed them to leave itself out. There was a breaching method entrenched, and we were supposed to address this. We have to understand how James Madsion and why they had to force everyone to take part with the Declaration of Independence, with the Constitutional Convention. And that was why and how that was not allowed, not just by the crazy laws against everyone, but also because of overt criminal enterprises, private ones, terrorists, all that propagated by the breaching method to keep others ourselves. To keep means shown, the breaching method shows them they have to hide the same finite, grouped, and simultaneous fact-checking nature, quality aspects in nature, use /s collusions with the breaching method, having been, being, and it shows them they need to hide things to come. The names of the people of science is A through Z. Some chant, some hum, some pounding drum. See president / chief as cipher to decipher too. But we were directed, in other words, I don't know if we're directed to not refer to our founders plural as anyone, like as if we know the name of any of them besides James Madsion. And now we're supposed to show how we caught them pretending other, while replacing what they communicated about how and why there were other founders that had to counter extort key people at key locations because everyone was forced to collusions north and south with torture, extortion, and slavery. We're not tracing that up. We have it cut off and replaced right through our schools, and sickly distinctly, but also sickly non-distinctly. That's why they left out the school book depository and its involvements with the assassination of President / Chief Kennedy. George Washington, we were directed us to be honest about his extortion. It would have brought up how, like, for example, George Washington came to Old Wethersfield, Connecticut, right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War with James Madison's plan and enabled by the leverage of the plural founders that directed us to not let people pretend we know the name of themselves, the plural founders. The only founder we know the name of is James Madsion, and it was his plan they used. And George Washington was using James Madison's plan. And he came there to counter-extort right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War. We're forced to understand deeply and profoundly how and why they had to use counter-extortion and how and why they had to leave slavery entrenched, even slavery rules. They had to leave rules against every woman entrenched. They had to leave rules making up fake reasons why and using all truths for lies about why. Otherwise, that body was sensed and it was adapted to, including if that body was a majority of people, including if it was everybody. And then further, all the countries themselves, too, individually grouped and together. It tortured, extorted, and enslaved them. The same way that the slavery rules were forced only permitted here. It had only been permitted in England. It had only been permitted through Africa, through Europe. Because the breaching method needed other things other than ourselves to be blamed increasingly. Because the breaching method, it knew that nature itself is going to show us what are all those different affronts on humanity about. At the same time, they're about a human fact, human nature breaching method that replaced right from James Madison's communications, even though it's known. Replaced right from nature itself, the communications of nature itself. So George Washington, we're supposed to be honest about that. And I don't know if that's why if he made that up or someone else did about there's a famous saying of George Washington where they say that he said he cannot tell a lie. He did chop down the cherry tree, but first he did. In other words, George Washington came to Connecticut, CT, which is the same name as cherry tree. We know no one had free speech to an extent, so it's plausibly cipher to be deciphered. Because this is how our founders directed us to explain the founding location /S, like the ones in Old Wethersfield. There's a witch trials place right there where George Washington came to counter-extort and gain the help of a French general. He had to sleep at Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens Museum. Then and now, where they have what George Washington communicated about it distinctly from, but also non-distinctly from what James Madison, the founders plural, communicated about it, replaced. They have sense and sensibilities, but that's my motivation, hiding the motivation. The breaching methods, their motivation since they were kids. The names of the people, the sciences A through Z. The names of the people complaining about them properly, only capable of doing it improperly. In other words, so the sciences, they're reliant upon experts on American history breached, changing the whole thing about James Madison, the only founder we know the name of, changing George Washington, what he says. They pretend to be up against dictators. They're using their sense and sensibility, sensing that they're replacing. It was all about, they had to counter-extort the other founders. They had to force everyone to help. And then still they had to leave slavery entrenched because even worse was entrenched. And if anyone spoke up, James Madison detailed, if anyone spoke up about any of those types of abridgments against women, against Native Americans, outside of internationally monitored conversations, or outside of the sense and sensibilities of work criminal enterprises, private ones, etc., they would sense for the breaching method and for themselves, because they would be hurt if not. Even those, in other words, not one human country does not have the hyper-foreign apart with it, apart with replacing the obligations on our experts to explain why and how nature shows us we are simultaneously supposed to be grouped and supposed to be independent and supposed to be unity at the same time, but tactically ulterior from how they will. The breaching method shows them to define these terms and to appreciate ourselves /s. The names of the people, the scientists, were child abused this way. Many pray for boxings. Watch my shadowboxing YouTube videos. Shadowboxing, species body longs to shadowbox, which hurts not one. The species body, if we could do things at countries A through Z with the same plan, we can make temporary moves that will make increasing positive value nature progressions. If they don't, just having tried to, and the mistakes with that will show us even greater means. And then we'll start getting good at it. At least some start by shadow box. Shadow boxing is easier on your body than running. Runners don't realize this. There's only so they want to do it. Runners, there are proofs that often they want to train harder than they can because their feet will start. When you start doing long distance running, your feet get wet. Then you start getting blisters on your toes and things. In other words, and even after a lot of miles, you feel the difference between the softness on asphalt as opposed to the concrete of sidewalks. Predicate offenses. What replacing what black pupils, whites of eyes, communicate by nature itself. It required a method for it. And there's a use of it. /s collusion too. Collusion /s. Only permitted. So, but a predicate act. I'm not a lawyer. But a predicate is a main verb. And why and how we need to appreciate more than one word for a verb, more than one name for a verb, is relative to what is nature showing us the body of the hyper-invisible but still discernible as its own body, which is it is functional, being only increasing value distinctly from how it is the invisible but still discernible, as the parts of speech of English grammar are, because they are names. They are about the invisible but still discernible. Why and how we need we only have two participle natures, the present participle and the past participle, which these are verbs. These are names for verbs, but they are no longer they are not the main verb. But there are only two. They're dealing with time, and there are only two of them. The future is discernible distinctly, but in other words, the present participle and past participle are and then there's a gerund, which is a ing. When you add ing on a verb, it is no longer a verb. Like run is a verb, but running is not a verb. There's a body that has the unchanging identity of relationship to itself. It has the only increasing value of that. But also that value is only here, increasing value, if we use its system and its identity of relativity / hyper-relativity to positive and negative. Or it forces demonstration /s of it in a special difference as our own value forced from here as Earth's a special difference. But through us, Earth loses difference and a special difference. So the entire ocean is abridged. The entire ocean, the fish have mercury in them. The fish have on YouTube somewhere. Joe Rogan apparently from eating sardines they have arsenic in them. CNN reported that there are long-lived isotopic particles in the ocean. There are all kinds of plastic apparently just keeps getting smaller and smaller, and it's in all of our bodies. There are PFAS, long-lived chemicals, and then the usual mercury. God knows whether there are other things in there too. This breaching method, we have to understand how evil it was. And the reason how that could be that way. We could discern how it was already entrenched. England does not remember the history of English properly. That's evidence. That's hyper-evidential. It was already entrenched there, the same way it stayed entrenched here and still controls our education. They cannot defend their positions and afford litigation proper and the nature proper treatments. This is about the nature. The predicate is about divisible but still discernible / hyper-invisible but still discernible. This is what we could see the body of it. This is what the present participle and the past participle are about as verbs. They are about the invisible but still discernible / hyper-invisible but still discernible. This is how we can discern it. Also, as the subject is the invisible but still discernible. With this, we could discern. We could only appreciate subjects individually and or finite, grouped and or actively, and simultaneously to an extent, /s. But simultaneously where we could observe, what we could appreciate, and how things are manifest the way they actually are manifest. We could also discern that there is that identity of value progression that is more finite than the smallest finite detail that is. And it is greater than everything that is. It is showing us that it is generating more of its identity of forever nature through temporary / lasting space nature. And this is how English was revealed to be taught. Boxing is fought, but by the rules. Boxing makes a shush, boxing's what makes no sound but shush. And are appreciating preferring the shush sound. Boxing prefers the shush sound. You'll hear it in any active boxing gym. Martial arts semi-prefer the shush sound, and wrestling does not prefer the shush sound. Nature's identity of value progression is increasingly the identity the scientists share, and with demonstration / estimate, including the arts, including the religions. Nature itself is showing us, as the writers of the religious books too knew they would. For example, before the religious messengers were even born, therefore before the church used confessions, a breaching method was already using confessions because it forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded the only people that, the entire species over, who could operate the phenomenon of the names of countries A through Z, locations, areas, and states, the species over. It forced, checked, hurt, and persuaded them to blame other things, others, or selves for things that it caused. And then it made counters to that improperly describe their counters, but need to defend that. And then counters to that. And it just, there was a regression, but everyone was missing the one sitting back with the clipboard and preparing to take over the databases. And the identity of value / value progression of the names of the entire species body, the identity of relativity / hyper relativity to the republic, to the databases of the republic for which we stand, which has been abridged, only remembered abridged since before religious messengers were born, and all exceptions too, because it valued exceptions. Because nature shows us how it is functional being itself as the hyper-invisible but still discernible distinctly from how it is itself, also as itself as the invisible but still discernible. it shows us that the parts of itself are equally increasingly valued, only incapable of being increasing value and positive to itself. Here, or we are for it is its value as our own is forced from here. Even the identity of nature has identity of relativity to positive and negative simultaneously already to an extent. It has positive that will only stay positive more and more made. Many pray. But to discern this, we have to discern how its volume, like every volume, has a distinct identity of relationship to itself. But it is the only one that is all other volumes at the same time, while it is not. But anyway, many pray vaccines, but now appear many pray because there is a proverbial devil as a cipher to decipher and to label as a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. I am not a lawyer. We need to make the ACE Act, the Anti-Hyper-Archetypal Criminal Enterprise Act. And Judge Napolitano and Judging Freedom can help us do this. But you guys can learn, because the predicate act is also about the invisible but still discernible, / hyper-invisible but still discernible. As it's about criminal insidiousness nature. And we're going to use science to reveal that nature itself shows us / hyper-criminal insidiousness nature. There is a distinct strain of criminal insidiousness nature that each has missed. The fists, ye species body, trade, I'll shadow box. Some rest, I tell it best, but some pace, at least some try. If we plan as a species body of individuals, just with a big enough majority of people, a big enough people group on YouTube, and the right plan, just the plan to admit altogether that we should either, we should entertain, contemplate at the same exact time if we should blame a hyperforeign, even if it's made up, which there are proofs, even if it's just a phenomenon, it's gone. There are proofs that there was once an anti-archetypal criminal enterprise, but also showed so long all natures of integrity that it only allowed to be the nature, like witch trials courts. Why is there a witch trials place near Webb House, a founding location where George Washington had to come to contract store right before the last battle of the Revolutionary War? Sure. Okay, thank you, people. So in other words, please, someone, because Fox News has, and Whiting Forensics and the FBI and Wethersfield Police in multiple courts, and then further additionally with the state judicial branch offices. They already had collusions with all sides of criminal and civil cases, crime scenes, body dumping spots. Wire crime acts and methods are manifest on a mass scale. Self-value, collusion / the people who answer, okay, at the news locations, they'll just change the fake ways. So they have roles with intelligence in ways people miss. They have, in other words, the differences of guilt. There are use / estimate collusions where there are appreciations of things as fact treatment nature. This is being and having been used remotely. Criminally foreign influence / hyper-criminally foreign influence. 3 ways relative to this. I thank you, people. Have a great night. Vaccines. I teach us things.